I've said it, and I'm betting you've said it too. It all sounds crazy until we find out that it's true. Radio waves, germs, and AI technology would have sounded batshit crazy not that long ago. But what about now? What will we look back on 50 years from now and say the same thing about? And importantly, how can we be a part of tomorrow's thinking? My next guest is the J. Newton Rayzor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He's also the author of How to Think Impossibly, about souls, UFOs, time belief, and everything else. Today, he's going to bring us on a thought journey to help us punch holes in our assumptions and learn the yes and of ordinary and extraordinary as we ask the question, can we take phenomena seriously and preserve critical thought? This is the Curious Introvert podcast with me, Meredith. Around here, we explore taboo questions and societal blind spots. My mission, and yours if you choose to accept it, is to inspire curiosity by exploring the nuance and paradox of our world. Please help me welcome historian of religions, fellow Nebraskan, and real-life Professor X, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Meredith. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. I really loved your book. In your book, you talk about thinking with, and I felt like I was thinking with you through the book. And so I actually wanted to open with a quote from the book for my first question. It says, "We have to stop assuming that our most fantastic stuff is purely legendary, only subjective, is mere metaphor, or can be fully explained in social, political, or moral terms." I loved that. But I want to know, what do you think happens when a society refuses to think impossibly?
People become too sure of themselves. I think thinking possibly is a form of certainty, and I think it's always a mistake. I think we start to exclude one another, and we exclude people who are not like us, which is a lot of people. That's what happens to a society. It becomes sterile and becomes exclusive and hateful.
That's interesting that you would say that, because when I think about thinking impossibly, I mean, I really love to kind of circle these really big thoughts about time and UFOs and consciousness. And to me, those are discussions that separate me from my fellow man. They're like, oh, okay, Meredith, But what you're saying is thinking impossibly has a pro-social effect.
I think so. I think those topics that you just named, you might feel alone, but you're not. Those are extremely popular topics, and they don't respect any political or ethnic or national boundaries. They're pretty much universal.
When you think about like the average person asking themselves, okay, this is fun to talk about and to think about, which it definitely is, but what's in it for me? What would you say to that individual who's seeking out that individualistic benefit for thinking impossibly? Why would they want to do it?
There might not be any benefit for the individual, but that's the whole point, I think, of the experience, is to get us beyond the individual, to get us beyond ourselves and to align ourselves with a greater reality.
Something that I think is an interesting, I like to say, thought experiment is the concept of time, because it's one of those things that, you learn time when you're little. You feel like of all the constants in life, it's like taxes, death, and time, right? But it's kind of fun to begin that non-linear thinking of it. And I loved the story in your book that you shared. I think his name was John. Can you share that
John.
story? Because that's kind of like a great illustration of, wait a minute, hold the phone. What is time?
So just to introduce that story a bit, I personally think people's precognitive dreams and experiences are some of the most powerful and some of the most obvious instances of the impossible. I think these things happen all the time. I think they're easy to cite because people just tell these stories, and they completely violate our sense of time, which is a sort of, the past has happened, but the future hasn't happened. We somehow imagine ourselves sort of on the wave of all cosmic time, which of course is silly, but that's what we do. So John Allison is a doctoral student here, and he had this experience where he basically visited himself from the future and assured himself that he would be okay. So it was one of these experiences where he remembered visiting himself in this apartment, in this basement apartment in Princeton, New Jersey, but he didn't know when it happened that, of course, it was him. It's where many interviewers and podcasters go. They go right to the John Allison story,
Yeah.
because it's so moving. It's so emotionally powerful. I mean, I've had people get teary eyed. This is at the essence of a lot of these experiences, is that they're deeply emotional.
Well, it wasn't just emotional, it was practical. And that's kind of where I sit with Thinking Impossibly. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, mantids, that's fun slash scary. But like, tell me how that benefits my everyday life. And I think a lot of people relate to that. It's like there's this day to day practical aspect of human life that is a big obstacle to even consider some of these things. So, what I liked about John's story is that it was unexpected. He wasn't looking for it. He was sitting in his basement apartment and saw a pair of legs through the window that were looked a lot like his own, and I guess like heard a voice that said it'll be okay. Is that how that
Mhm.
goes? It wasn't
Yeah.
okay. And then
Yeah.
a couple years later, he was walking towards the apartment and saw the light on and saw himself sitting in the apartment. And so it was like he got to sit on both sides of this moment, which was really, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it.
You know, what most people don't realize is that the word telepathy, for example, it means pathos at a distance. It means deep emotion. And that a lot of these experiences don't just happen, they happen in traumatic situations. And I think they're about healing. And with the abduction experience or the alien idea, of course, you don't care until, of course, it happens to you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, it really does matter. And it isn't what I thought it was. And so there is this mystery or this question that's asked a lot about, why did this happen to me, or why did this occur? And sometimes where people land is that there's this bigger sense of self, that the experience might look silly or meaningless or without a purpose, but in fact, it suggests that we're more than we think we are. That's the purpose or meaning of a lot of these events.
And that it's going to be okay. When I read the John story, I remembered I had something like that happen to me. And it wasn't
Mhm.
as visual. It was not me walking, next to a window, but it was last year and I was just kind of going through a little bit of a hard time. And I heard a voice that was way louder than a thought, but not audible. And it said, I'm here. It's going to be okay. And I even told my husband, and I was like, I just heard this. And he said, well, what did the voice sound like? And I said, it was my voice. And he didn't know what to think of it. Neither did I, but the message was comforting. And I think that's an important takeaway for people who are trying to start this impossible thinking, because it can be so uncomfortable, because the framework of your reality could be way off, and that can make people uneasy.
I think our framework for reality is very practical, and I think it's for reproductive and practical issues, obviously, but that doesn't mean that's what reality is. And sometimes we have these experiences that don't fit into our worldview. And the point of everything I'm trying to say is just listen to those experiences. Don't dismiss them. They're happening for a reason, to communicate with you. You know, you were speaking to yourself and you listened, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But not everybody does, Meredith. And I think that's a real tragedy.
So break that down like I'm a fifth grader, because I think, like I've said, the idea of nonlinear time is a fun one, but really not at first. Because it's like the math problem you thought you had right, and then the teacher comes back with the red marks all over your paper. And so, can you explain it for somebody that's just kind of embarking on the time is not past, present, future?
I honestly, I can't explain it because explanation presumes the senses. It presumes the way we think, right? And so for me, it's a contradiction in terms. What I do as a teacher is I try to get people to step out of their worldviews and to be reflexive, I say, about them, to think about thinking and to imagine imagining and to not believe your beliefs or not think your thoughts. That's really the goal of, I personally think of profound teaching. And when we explain things, or when I hear this phrase, well, prove it, I'm like, you're just using science to prove science. You're just using your senses to prove your senses. What if reality, or what if truth is not about the senses? What if it's outside the human sensorium completely? And these moments, like John visiting himself from the future, or these moments where we know someone has died, or we know a loved one is in danger. I mean, there's many instances of this. These all suggest that it's not what we think it is, that we're not stuck in time, we're not stuck in space, we're outside of it in some ways. And I personally think that's a very hopeful, very fantastic message. But I also want to recognize that some of these experiences are terrifying, and they're not always good. They break down, or they're traumatic. They challenge the subject or the individual or the embodied person in really dramatic ways. Something I often say is, you don't get a near-death experience until you almost freaking die. So think about that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. But sometimes it does happen when, you're in a car accident, or you have a heart attack, or you're really ill, or something really bad happens. It's then that these moments can intervene or occur, but not drinking coffee or talking to someone on a podcast. We're not going to have one sitting here.
Wait, are you kidding? I had this whole time block set aside for a paranormal experience. You mean we
Yeah,
can't
it's not
order
going to
it?
happen there. It's not going to happen, Meredith.
Oh, that's so
Sorry.
disappointing.
Yeah.
If we were to ask what if on the time thing, what questions could we start asking? I love that you said I help people think about thinking, and because that's really exciting to me too. I love that you also said that's an exciting feeling, because a small rabbit trail. I was talking with someone about her faith, and she was asking me about mine. And I was explaining that the more I don't know, the more excited I get, the more expansive I feel my relationship with God, or, whatever is out there is. Like I can feel it at this moment. It feels so less constrained than it did in my Pentecostal church days. And
Yeah.
it's really an exciting thought.
So why is that? I mean, why are you and other people are them? I mean, that sounds banal, but I see this every day in the classroom. There are some young people who want to break out of their worldviews and their cultures and their communities. There are other people, they want the walls higher and thicker. They want absolute certainty about everything. And again, what the stepping outside really implies is that certainty is not a good thing, that ambiguity and questioning are really much more human and much more open-ended and lead to a better society. But that takes a certain person, Meredith. Not everybody can do that. And I've come to just accept that some people can't do that.
Well, the people that are listening right now are
Well, but
are
again,
presumably.
they chose to listen.
Oh,
They're
okay.
on this podcast for a reason, or they're listening to it for a reason. It's like a classroom. The students who are there are self-chosen, so I tend to get more people who want to be knocked out of their system, but there's a whole realm of people who do not.
So if we were to go back off this rabbit trail, oh, that was fun. Back to the time thing. When we think of time as linear, I actually picture a conveyor belt, the kind at the airport that move where the floor moves. And so
Yeah.
you're coming from the past, going to you're in the present, you're going to the future. But if we were to reimagine it, would it be layers, instead of one line, it would be like different layers of time, and sometimes they bend into each other like waves? Or is it a circle? If you and I were just sitting having a beer and we were just playing around with
It's
thoughts,
too early to have a beer, by the way.
no
Maybe
one knows
coffee.
that.
Right,
You
right.
spoiled the mystery, Jeff.
This is why I actually love the history of religions, because it's filled with different understandings or models of time. And I think when we think of time, we think of tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. That's not the human experience. The human experience, for example, eternity, people jump out of space and time entirely, and they have experience of this all at oneness or all at onceness that they call eternity. And or they experience time as already happened. The future's already happened, or it's already written. And of course, then where they go with that is, well, then I don't have a choice. And I'm like, well, who says? You know, nobody says that when they look to the past, they didn't have a choice to make all those decisions, and all of those events are already done. So why, when we turn around, do we suddenly say, well, we don't have a choice if they're already done? And of course, the reason we do that is our experience of time, our experience of temporality. And we really do imagine the future differently than the past. But again, these moments of precognition suggest that it's not entirely different, and that our experience of time might be neurological. It might be a function of us. You know, this, not to get philosophical on you, but this.
I mean, that's what we're here for. So please.
Okay. Maybe time is a function of the brain. Maybe it's not out there.
Okay.
Okay. And again, these extraordinary or impossible experiences suggest that. And I'll give you a really solid example of this. David Eagleman. David is a really well-known neuroscientist. And when he was a kid, he fell off a building. When he fell like 2 stories, he landed on his nose, by the way. As he was falling, time slowed way down. And he, of course, noticed that. And so he spent a lot of the rest of his life wondering, well, what is time? And how is it related to the brain? And maybe the brain itself is the creator of time. And maybe in these traumatic situations where the organism thinks it's dying or thinks it's in trouble, time is slowed way down so that it can survive, so that it can do the right thing. I'll give you another example. Here's another example from my own life. I was a kid. I was playing safety on the football team. I remember this one time I was looking at the quarterback. I saw him throw the ball. I went up for the interception, and time just slowed way down again. And there was no sound either, because you need time to have sound. So there was no time, there was no sound, and I could maneuver my body just right. I could intercept this football. And then when I hit the grass again, then time sped up and the sound was back. People were screaming, and but it was really dramatic. And I was just a kid, and I was like, well, what was that? Why did that happen? And I think once we start to think of time as a function of the brain and not out there, these things actually make a lot of sense. My young body thought that it was in physical danger. And of course, it probably was,
Or
but
it was flow state. It could have been flow state.
Well, but again, why the flow state? I mean, I've had people tell me about flow states in motorcycle accidents too. So it seems to take some kind of traumatic or physically difficult situation for this to kick in. David's experience suggests that. My football experience suggests that. The motorcycle accident suggests that. But
That's
again,
a really interesting thought, because that's true. When there is adrenaline, it
Yeah.
changes the way that we perceive time. There was this one time we were at the river, and it's Blackwater River. And so there's lots of little pockets. Depending on how much rain we've had, those pockets can be fairly harmless, or they can really suck you under, especially if there's a log. And we were pulling off to the side of the river. We all had floats. And I stepped up on the bank, but I missed, or I slipped, and I got sucked under. And actually, I just remember this. Right as we were getting ready for our trip to the river, we were unpacking the truck. I was quoting a movie that said, "I saved your life." And I forget what movie it's from, but I kept saying it, "I saved your life." And we were like all joking and saying, "I saved your life." And so fast forward to the moment in the river, I slipped and I was held down under the river. And I just was like kind of looking around like, I'm underwater. Probably longer than I should be. Wonder if I'm going to die. Like, it was a weird time to be reflective. And then my husband grabbed me and pulled me up, not in a reflective, calm state. And then after we all settled, we were like, That was weird that you were like quoting that movie earlier and Garrett literally just saved your life. And so that I really like this thought that time could be a function of the brain, which also is kind of a rebuttal, if you will, to the idea that if time is not linear, then we don't have free will. But if time is a function of the brain, we in fact do, as illustrated by I didn't in fact die.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think we do have free will, but we as in the individual in this on this dimension or in this zone, I mean, Meredith and Jeff does, but this bigger picture, I think free will, it implies a kind of atomic individualism, that I suspect isn't who we really are. The question doesn't even make sense in that bigger picture. And the other thing I want to say, though, to your comment is, I have a really good friend named Eric Wargo, and Eric thinks that pretty much all paranormal phenomena are camouflaged precognition.
Interesting.
I suspect he's right about
Hmm.
most things, and I can give you examples of why. But your experience that you just related there, you probably were having some kind of precognitive hit, but you don't know that it's precognitive until after the fact.
Most of the time, no. I've shared this
Yeah.
on the podcast before, but a few years back, I knew my husband was going to be in an accident a couple of hours before.
Okay, so I'll give you an example of this. So I was lecturing once at a university, and a woman pulled me aside, a colleague, and told me that she had sent her son up to a zoo with a nanny, and let's say it was 10:04, she felt this compression in her body, and she says a video just went off in my head, and I saw all of this white smoke fill the car up, which confused me. And I saw my son screaming in the back. So what is a mother going to do? Well, a mother's going to act immediately. And so she called the nanny. The nanny was fine. They hadn't gotten to the zoo. She told the nanny to drive home real slowly on side roads, which she did. The next day, the kid, of course, mom ruined my trip to the zoo. So I want to go back to the zoo. So the mother isn't going to take any chances. And so she says, okay, I'll drive. I'll take you. And she's in a high-speed collision. The car spun around. The airbags went off. The car filled up with white smoke as you get from an airbag, which is why it was white. And that exact scene played out, of her son screaming in the back seat, in the car seat. The man who hit her, she couldn't move. He called her husband, and the call came in at like 10:08 or something. So she had a precognitive vision the morning before, but she mistook it for a clairvoyant or a telepathic vision. And that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because in some ways, the mother caused the experience by trying not to cause it, right?
Yeah.
She prevented the trip on the first day, and so the trip on the second day happened, and the experience played out. So she couldn't change the event, but my reply to her was, well, you might have been more careful, or you might have been suspicious because of what had happened on the first day, and that might have prevented you from having an even worse accident. We don't know, of course,
Right.
but it's a good example of a precognition that is mistaken for something else.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand what precognition is.
Precognition means you have an experience of the future, which you probably don't know even that it's an experience of the future when it happens. But later, after the experience plays out, you're like, oh, I saw all that. I had that. I saw that in a dream, or I saw that in a vision, or that's a precognition. It means you cognize something before it happens.
There's some interesting historical records of this too. You talked about them in your book. I think you mentioned Harriet Tubman, and then you mentioned the woman from Eatonville, Florida. Can you share about that?
Zora Neale Hurston.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Zora Neale Hurston was a well-known African-American writer, and she wrote this memoir called dust tracks on a road. And she talks about being a little girl, being 7 years old, having done some prank involving a hen, actually. And so she's hiding on a porch after this childhood prank. And she goes into some kind of altered state and she gives it a word, stereo opticon or something. I forget the word, but it referred to the way slides were existed at the time. This was around probably 1897 or so, somewhere in the late part of the 19th century. And those 12 scenes all play out in her later life. So she was given precognitions of her later life as a 7-year-old little girl. And again, we don't know exactly why, but this is how she actually structures her memoirs, is largely through these 12 scenes. And it made young Zora feel different, special, but also different than the rest of her family and the rest of her community. And I think this is the nature of a lot of these experiences, is that it often removes the person from the community or the culture in a pretty significant way.
And that's why you say in your book, you had a new word that you made, neo something, that meant think with, and that this is why you're saying it's pro-social, because it's like, actually, when you download an app on your cell phone and it's like the free version and it has LITE, light. It's like thinking impossibly when you're with someone who's had an experience like this and they're vulnerable enough to share it, is like listening plus instead of listening light.
It's the full app. It's the full aperture. To use the metaphor. So the thing I would say to that, though, is the experience wants to be told. It wants to be told as a story. So when you sit down with the person and you think with, with that hyphenated think with, I think that's what the experience intends. It wants to be communicated not just to the person, because it's also appearing as a story for the person. It's being woven into a story. But the person is telling the experience so that it will have some kind of cultural or community life.
How interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So hence your podcast.
Hence the podcast. Well, I also had a memory of a sales training that I did in regards to time management that I wanted to check with you, because as I was going through this, I feel like I've been on this journey of impossible thinking for the last, I don't know, I'll say 3 years now. But as I was reading your book, it was really making me reflect back on, I was thinking about my thoughts, Jeff. And I was thinking about this sales training that I did for time management. And I would tell the saleswomen, oh, hey, what time is it right now? We're in Central Time. And so they would say, oh, it's 12 o'clock. Okay, but what time is it in Jacksonville, Florida, which is Eastern Time? And they would say, well, it's 1 o'clock. And then I said, yeah, but what time is it in California? Oh, well, it's 10 o'clock over there. And so I said, well, what time is it then? And they would look at me and I would say, well, time is really a construct. And so time doesn't have to happen to you. You can have control of your time because we made it up after all. And so what my question is, this just sales training dressed esoterically, or is that actual impossible thinking in a very practical sense?
Well, that might be sales thinking. I don't
okay.
know.
That's fair. There's no wrong answer there.
Yeah. I mean, relativity theory in the Einsteinian sense, and the sense of modern physics, is that there is actually no now. There's no universal now. Time is relative to one's perspective. But the problem with relativity theory is it doesn't really kick in until you're moving at this almost at the speed of light, or you're really heavy. So, but we know, or we think we know from relativity theory, that there is no time. We used to think of time and space as sort of a container. We're moving through space, and time is set as well, and we're moving through time. People who, particularly physicists, don't think about space and time that way anymore. They think about it as geometry, or they think about it as somehow manipulable, somehow warpable, as it were. And the thing about precognitive experiences, to take it back to the human, because this is where I think we're human after all, I do think that John, for example, or the woman I was talking about with the child, or you and the almost drowning, I think you're actually experiencing something about physical reality. you are accessing the real, as it were. But it's feeding through your emotional life or your dream life, or in this case, the mother's life, or in David Eagleman's case, falling off a roof. However it's showing up, it always needs a context to show up at, but they're actually accessing some part of physical reality as well. We don't have a model for that. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book, is trying to say, look, these are not just fluffy, tangential experiences that we can dismiss. This actually tells us something about the nature of space and the nature of time and the nature of reality. So what does it tell us? You know? And again, I don't have an answer to that, Meredith, but I think that's the opening salvo, as it were, because I think these experiences really do matter in
Yeah.
both metaphorically and literally.
Right. Realer than real, as some people say.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the barriers to impossible thinking is that, like, people who maybe have like a very strong and also rigid religious framework, they might
Yeah.
see it as demonology, or they might not even say the word demonology, but they would say, like, that's the devil, or you shouldn't mess with that. And I hear people say the devil could be deceiving you, tricking you, showing up as an angel of light. And in another interview, you said that for the most part, you think that demonology as a whole is a mistake. Can you
Yeah,
explain that?
I do. I think it's a profound mistake. So thinking impossibly is not reducing the experience to your worldview, whether that worldview is scientific and secular, or whether that worldview is religious and let's say biblical in this case. And the reason I think demonology is a deep mistake is historically it's been used to dismiss people and to literally demonize these experiences. And if you demonize these experiences, guess what you get? You get demons. This is what shows up. I think we're in some ways responsible for the demonic nature of these experiences. Like, we actually demonize them. And I think demonization is really a religious way of excluding something from your system. It's saying, this challenges my belief system, therefore it must be from the devil. And I'm like, but it's part of reality too. This person really had this experience. And it often occurs in a traumatic context. So there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of maybe bad things happening. That doesn't mean it's demonic. Calling something demonic just adds a layer of suffering to it, is what I'm trying to say. And if I can say this in another way, I have never met a demon that didn't look like a suffering human being.
So you've met demons? I'm sorry, I got to
Oh,
ask.
no, I have not.
Okay.
I have not, but I've seen lots of portrayals. I've seen lots of portrayals
Ah,
of demons,
okay.
in texts and in art, but they always look to me like suffering human beings. And so I think what we're doing when we call something a demon is we're just pulling some explanation out of our worldview and applying it to something, and we're causing more suffering, more more evil in the world by that kind of label. And I just think we should stop doing that.
It's almost like the person creates the demon out of their own thoughts. You wrote extensively about that in your book, which I had
Yeah.
never heard, by the way, and I thought was so interesting because you talked about demonic possession and especially the poltergeist bit.
Yeah.
Because as I said, I've been on this, journey and kind of revisiting random things throughout my life that I've heard about, and poltergeists is one of them. For those who aren't familiar, things physically getting, like, being thrown, cabinets being slammed, water turning on or off, etc. And what you were proposing in the book is just basically psychokinesis. Like, the mind is creating that experience, and that oftentimes in situations where there is this negative poltergeist activity, the person is under some sort of mental anguish, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they don't even realize they could be potentially causing the physical moving of objects through their upset emotional state.
The poltergeist is a perfect example because what we think we know about poltergeist cases is that there's almost always a suffering human being involved. For example, I don't know if I tell this story in the book, but when I went to southern Germany many years ago and I visited a parapsychology lab there, I met with a bunch of psychiatrists who go out and they address poltergeist cases. That's what they do. And the first thing they do when they go into a poltergeist house is they start to work with the family psychodynamically. And the family's like, what the hell? What are you doing? We have a freaking ghost here, and you're talking about how I feel about my mother, my father. I mean, come on. And the psychiatrists, they were like really good. They were like, if we can get the family to face up to its problems, the poltergeist stuff goes away. If they will not address the psychodynamic problems, it sticks around. It keeps creating havoc, you know? That theory of the poltergeist, it helps in some ways because it explains it in terms of human emotion. But in other ways, it doesn't explain it because it's like, why is human emotion? Why are the curtains ripping off? And why is the kettle bending? And why are there scratches? And I'm like, yeah, because people are really, really upset. They are pissed and they cannot express this anger emotionally for whatever cultural or family reasons. So they do it, as we say, unconsciously. And so I don't blame the people. It's not that someone's sitting around in a committee meeting and deciding to do weird stuff. It's that human beings are extraordinary, Meredith. And when they are imposed in certain ways, they will respond in extraordinary ways. And so that's what I'm trying to get at with that chapter. It's called We Are God and the Devil. That's what the chapter is called.
Yeah, it was a good chapter. It made me think a lot about Skinwalker Ranch because, so again, for people who don't know, it's a 500 plus acre area out in Utah that is known for like literally every single weird thing.
Yeah.
Just name a weird thing. And it has happened at Skinwalker Ranch. And you served on the board there. Tell me all about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can talk about Skinwalker. First of all, I've never been there, but I've talked to people who spent lots of time there, and they're like, Jeff, don't go. Don't do it.
Really?
Yeah, really. They're like,
Okay.
no, don't.
Wait. So how do you feel about it? Like, why haven't you gone? Are you freaked out? Would you go?
I don't want to be haunted.
Wait a minute. Yeah. You just gave this beautiful speech about how it's like your own psychological state that
No, I think there's something about Skinwalker Ranch. I think there's some kind of entity there. I think there's something in the environment, and it fucks with human beings. And it avoids scientific explanation or reduction. It seems to avoid it in principle. So there's something about Skinwalker Ranch that reflexes back our own human approach to it. And it's quite negative. It doesn't want to be studied. It doesn't want to be poked and prodded and dug up, And so my response to that is don't. Leave it alone, So, yeah, I mean, and Skinwalker, by the way, it's a translation of a Navajo term that means shape-changing witch. So the indigenous cultures knew darn well that there was something going on, and to avoid that place as well by all costs. And dumb people go right in and like, I'm gonna study this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make a television series, whatever they're gonna do. I'm like, that's not a very smart idea.
Okay, so what are you doing on the board then? If your general consensus is like, hey guys, this is a bad idea, I imagine that would make your time on the board rather short if you showed up and announced that.
I don't know what you mean by the board. Do you mean
the advisory board?
The Bigelow Bix?
I don't know. I just read
so
somewhere.
I have nothing to do with Skinwalker Ranch.
Ah, okay. So I'm just mistaken. You're not on the board.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on a board for the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, but it does not have those problems or those issues.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, I mean, we're getting into the problem. To what extent are paranormal phenomena or impossible phenomena human? They're manifestations of us. And to what extent are they entity encounters, or are they human beings encountering something other than human? I think that's a real question and a real issue. And something like Skinwalker Ranch looks to me like human beings encountering some kind of entity or entities, where the poltergeist cases we talked about earlier and the precognitive dreams and the precognitive hits we talked, those look very human to me. The demonic possession looks very human. Skinwalker Ranch does not look human to me. Something else is going on there.
So, do you see where church people would be like, we probably shouldn't mess with any of it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course I understand. I mean, but that doesn't mean it's a demon. Deception does not mean being sinister. Deception is used to hide in the environment. It's used to prey on other creatures. It's used for reproduction purposes. I use it all the time. Every time I take my little furry friend to the veterinarian, I deceive her. I'm guilty, but I do it for good purposes. I do it because she needs her teeth cleaned, or she needs to see the vet, or what. She doesn't know that. So deception does not mean, or camouflage does not mean being bad. It's a sign of intelligence, actually. It's a sign of life. And I think what we do is we collapse camouflage or deception with being sinister or evil. That's just a terrible mistake.
I think that's a really cool thought, actually. I don't think I had separated the two.
I know, because we think of deception as a bad thing, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's
Yeah.
not always,
Well, no, especially when you use the example of camouflage, animals using camouflage, like they're not sinister, they're just trying to not get eaten. But it's human nature to want to close that loop. We love checking the boxes and finishing the thing and solving the problem. I mean, think about, the Apple Watches, they have a loop, and you'll hear people go, "Oh, I closed my loop today." And it meant, I think, that they met all their fitness goals.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if that tendency to want to close the loop or finish the thing or solve the problem, answer the question, is so strong that Apple based an entire product out of it, then for people, how do you get more cozy with not having that loop closed?
Well, again, I don't think the real world is closed. I don't think it's cozy. I don't think it's comfortable. And some human beings relish in that openness. Other human beings fear it. And this goes back to our early conversation. I don't know why people are so different, but some really want the high walls and the thick walls, and other people want no walls. And particularly creative people, intellectuals, they don't want walls, because walls are what lock one in and what works against creativity. So creativity by nature is a no wall, or a small wall kind of option.
I loved that you said that the creativity is kind of like an ingredient to impossible thinking, because it invites like a sense of fun, and it lets you, I don't know, I watch movies completely differently now, because I'm like, I wonder if that's true. What, and then I just, it drives my husband crazy, because if we're watching the movie at home, which is, most of the time, I'm sitting there with my phone. He goes, "Did you just Google that word? Did you?" And X-Men is one of those things, because, as a kid, I loved X-Men. I love that you have an equal love for X-Men, which is why, you have this nickname of the real Professor X. But you told me that you actually have some sort of interaction with the X-Men franchise. What's that all about?
So first of all, I think the X-Men are real. I think people really have these abilities, right? We've been talking about them the whole podcast. And I've written about, I think the X-Men is a mythology that people can grok. And what I think about a lot is these screenwriters and these directors and these filmmakers, they're frankly reading us. My joke is, these are my students. And I don't mean I literally had them in class, although sometimes I did. I mean, look, they're getting these ideas from us. and then they're turning them into movies or into fantasy because that's what they do and that's what sells. But the stories themselves are based on these real world stories. And I have heard from the screenwriters and a director from the X-Men franchise, and I know they're reading my stuff because they told me. I wrote a book called Mutants and Mystics about 14 years ago now, and it's very much on comics and science fiction is rooted in the paranormal. It's about having abilities, it's about adolescence, it's about growing up, it's about being different, it's about not fitting in, it's about a lot of things that we can talk about. But at the root is this notion that human beings have abilities that the culture of the society doesn't recognize. And that's what I write about. That I think that's actually the case. You know, one of my colleagues, he's no longer with us, but he used to write about religion as legitimate science fiction.
Interesting.
And I think that's right. I think that's right. I think virtually all the sci-fi ideas are essentially religious ideas first. And human cultures and human civilizations have played those out in different ways. So, yeah, the relationship to the X-Men films is a real one, but it's also a theoretical or conceptual one. We're okay with these superpowers as long as they're entertainment and fantasy. We are not okay with them if they are real. Why is that? It's kind of a cop-out.
Well,
If I can
is it a
lead on
cop
to that.
out or is it a soft launch?
Okay, that's a great question. What if the phenomena itself needs the movies, needs the fantasy to present itself at all? And this gets back to our issue of camouflage or deception. What if the experience itself needs the fantasy to show itself? Maybe it does.
Well, it's exciting when you think about that our imaginations, since we're talking about creativity and entertainment, are so powerful that we can not only create amazing, awesome movies and comic books and fun things to think about that really stretch your imagination, but we can also heal some of our ailments. And so I don't know, like Jacques Vallée says that the nature of our universe is algorithmic. And that just kind of lives rent free in my brain when I think about the what ifs and I maybe desire for something to be different or upgraded or possible. That idea that we can pull into our reality that simply by thinking about it, much like we would Googling it or searching for it on Amazon, then we suddenly see it pop up on the internet. Jacques Vallée's theory is that the nature of reality is much the same way that those things will pop up, and certainly on the negative side, like the poltergeists and demons and that sort of thing. But it's an exciting thought that we have that kind of, I don't know, untapped power, which is, of course, the whole premise of X-Men.
Well, again, this gets to the heart of the book. What if the imagination is the medium of these powers? What if the powers don't and cannot show up without some kind of imaginal framework? I mean, I think that's the deeper question. And this is why I get so upset with people like you mentioned the mantis or the alien abduction. I get really upset with people who say, well, that's just absurd. You know, I can dismiss it. I'm like, well, maybe that's part of the message. You know, maybe the absurdity is part of it and it can only manifest that way.
It's
It can only show.
it's a tricky balance because, as you said, why is it that we embrace entertainment, but we reject people's personal stories of them telling us this happened to me?
Here's the thing, Meredith. Religions are nutty. They are so sci-fi. So for some reason, we're okay believing the most outrageous things
Yeah.
that are clearly nutty, but we're not okay believing that a gray alien showed up in the bedroom of so and did so and so. Why do we draw that line? That's the line I'm very suspicious of.
And that's a hard one for people to unpack. You know, that's a different, I mean, that's not an entry level impossible thinking skill. I know
I
it probably
didn't say this was entry level.
well,
I didn't.
My desire is to keep everyone at the table. We got the new folks, we got the medium folks, and we got the folks that are like, where you're at, where you get to think impossibly for a living. And you talk in the book about being even-handedly skeptical, which I loved because it really is tricky to vacillate from being wildly entertained to wildly rejecting things. And so how do you do that? How do you suggest to someone, how do you personally, let's go with that. How do you personally stay even-handedly skeptical when considering wild things?
For me, it's quite natural, and it really is a function of honesty. I just give you an example. When someone has a near-death experience and tells me about the experience, I think the person is sometimes upset I won't sign my name to that's what the afterlife looks like, whatever it is they saw. But the reason I won't is not because I believe too little, it's because I believe too much, Meredith. It's because I take the other person's near-death experience and the other person's near-death experience and the other person's near-death. I take them all as seriously as I take this person's, and they cancel each other out. So I think we need to develop a model of the imagination that something's coming through the imagination, but it's not itself the imagination, if that makes sense. In other words, the near-death experience might tell us something about the soul or consciousness, but it itself isn't literally true, And, part of that's a function of how I study religion, frankly. I believe too much. It's not that I believe too little. And I want to take all human beings seriously, not just some of them. And I include the secular scientists in this, by the way. They're as committed to an ideology as sometimes more than anybody else. And I'm like, okay, that works. I get how that works. I get how that produces pharmaceuticals or technology or aerospace, but you're not talking about what reality is. You're talking about how it works.
Yeah.
And so it's an ideology too that I want to poke the bear, as it were. I want to push them on.
Yeah. You know what that makes me think of? This is such a weird parallel, but I interviewed a political philosopher and I was like, how do we get rid of two parties? And he said, we probably can't. The best we could do is flood the market with multiple parties. And that's essentially what you've just said is if we can't get rid of this or that, we have to do the this and the that and a this and a this and a this in order to really go to the next place.
So my position isn't that, well, we're stuck with religion, so let's deal with it. That's not the position. The position is religion is incredibly diverse and people are having visions all the time. I mean, it's wild. And if you have 400 or 4,000 religions, guess what? They're not going to kill each other. But if you have one or two, guess what? It's going to kill the others. And so my response is, well, let's affirm everyone's religious experience. And let's affirm people who don't have a religious experience. Let's affirm them too. Let's put it all on the table and talk about it all as a culture and as a society. And again, I think that's healthy. I think that's just honest.
Well, it's also fun. So I also like it. One of the other ingredients of impossible thinking that you alluded to but didn't say outright in the book was really brutal honesty. You said scholarship can be ventriloquism and an agreement can be camouflage narcissism. And so that was what I got out of that, is that you have to be really brutally honest with yourself in order to have this habit of impossible thinking.
You have to be willing to be wrong. Why do you want to be right about everything? That's just odd.
It's kind of boring also.
Yeah, of course I'm wrong about all kinds of things, but so what? That's the conversation. That's what you're trained to do in the academy. I don't want to presume that training, but certainly that's what we tried to get our students to do, is to be wrong about things and to be comfortable with that.
What about impossible thinking's impact on mental health?
I sit and talk to experiencers a lot, people who have had these experiences. And one of the things I've noted, first of all, is that secrecy. They often won't talk about them. And they won't share them with even sometimes spouses. They won't share them with therapists. They won't share them with medical people. That leads to human suffering. And so I think the ability to share them is really crucial to mental health. On the other hand, I do not presume that all of these experiences are good for mental health. I do not presume that. One of the lessons, one of the first lessons one learns when one studies religion is that religious experiences is not the good. The sacred and the good are not the same thing. The sacred can be as devastating and as terrifying as it can be redemptive and ecstatic. And this is one of the takeaways you get from studying religion comparatively. And so, for example, take the UFO. I love to talk about UFOs. The UFO can be utterly destructive and terrifying to someone who has a closed worldview. But it can also be redemptive and ecstatic and salvific to someone who's willing to be broken open and who's willing to see the world in a bigger way. And those are human responses, Meredith. I don't think it's a function of the UFO or reality. I think it's us again. I think we're responding with fear, or we're responding with acceptance and with openness.
Can you just imagine you or I being abducted on an alien ship? They'd probably send us back. They'd be like, these fools ask way too many questions. We're sending them home.
Yeah, I don't know. My joke is I'm really dull. I haven't had these experiences. Other people have them. And I'm like, man, you are so not dull. You are so out there, but I'm not. And I can't speak for you. I haven't had these haven't had these experiences for decades, by the way.
The more I explore this, the more I have small things happen. Nothing major, but like the little things that I mentioned today, I hadn't planned on sharing those. And it seems like I get amnesia about the things that have happened. Perhaps I should write them all down.
But you don't want those. You don't want to drown, Meredith.
No, but I have had other smaller things that are in that similar category that if I told them, they would just sound silly, but they're like little breadcrumbs that, I could choose to follow, which is fun. And I think it's interesting. I like the feeling that my brain is being used. And that's why I like stuff like that. But it's also why I like talking about it. And I realize that this is, a special thing that, I get to have a podcast and talk with people like you and read your book. So thank you for that. And thank you for your book. I think this is probably the perfect segue for you to tell us where we can buy How to Think Impossibly.
You can buy it anywhere, just on your usual bookstores or digital internet sources. You can find it anywhere, actually.
My favorite quote from your book is a quote from Anne Schreiber. She said that mankind is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. And so I want to thank you for your good questions today. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. It's all about the questions.
Thanks for listening. Since you've made it this far, I'd like to invite you to be a part of my private Facebook group. In there, I post content that I don't share anywhere else, and you can talk to me directly about past and future episodes. I also do occasional giveaways. Search MFR Curious Insiders on Facebook or click the link in the show notes. And if you liked this episode, you'll also like the one asking if aliens are real, why does no one seem to care? That's episode 287. And stay tuned next week when I talk with a former news exec asking how and why mainstream media is such a circus. Until then, keep it curious.